Welcome to our proteins webinar. My name is Rebecca, and on behalf of Oxford Global, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to introduce Denise Steckel, Head of Clinical Collaboration Management of Genentech, who will be presenting on working with clinical collaborators in combination studies. Once again, after the presentation, we'll have a 10-minute Q&A session. Please submit your questions through the chat option on the bottom of the menu display. So over to you, Denise.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. And I will be sharing with you clinical collaborations, the why and how insights into successfully managing combination studies. So just to kind of give you an overview of what we'll be covering this morning is, or today, why we do combination trials, the necessary requirements for combination studies, key factors for success, advantages, challenges, and lessons learned to date on this journey. So why do we do combination trials? So just to make sure this is really clear, combination trials, what I'm talking about here is where we're using two drugs in a study. So a patient would get drug A and drug B. They're not co-developed together. They are you're going to get drug A, and then shortly after you're going to be dosed with drug B for the studies that we're talking about here. And these drugs, one of them is an internal Roche asset or molecule, Genentech Roche, and one of them is a drug from a different company. So why do we do this? So we do this to identify safe and effective combination therapies, to support cross-indication learnings and identify combinations for priority development, and to identify a molecular mechanism of action that will work in combination with one of our molecules. So as we're moving along in our oncology space, both in solid tumor and heme, what we're finding is that combination studies are really going to be one means of success for patients. So collaborator molecules are used in combination studies to generate the signal-seeking data across a wide scope of combination studies. And so I guess as we continue in this conversation, the thing to keep in mind is the collaborator we're working with, they give us their molecule, could be commercial or it could be clinical. And in doing so, we will share the study data with them. So I kind of like to think about this relationship as a give and a take, right? So we receive the product, we use it in the study, we run the study, we collect the data, and then we provide that data back to our collaborator so they understand if their product in combination with ours was successful. So moving on. So when you work with combination studies, there's requirements for the study to be successful because, again, just as a reminder, we're bringing in a outside company's drug into the Genentech Roche network, and we're labeling it and we're releasing it into our studies. So they're not making the drug for us, they're providing it to us. So it's very different. So what are the necessary requirements for success? So we have a dedicated team to support collaborations through the entire process, through contract negotiation up front, which is a business contract, through operational contracts that need to be put in place, so safety agreements, quality agreements, moving material, and data sharing and closeout of the study. So to be successful in this, we align on requirements for both companies very early. We understand the collaborator's supply chain, so we need to understand where their product is made, not how it is made, because that would be proprietary, but where it is made, because our studies are global. And then with them, very early on, we discuss and develop a quality path forward. So understanding if their product is made in the United States and it's going to go to Europe, how are we going to make sure that we can get a QP, qualified person, release on this product? Also, we have clear communication on study start timing, so site activation and first patient in. This is always a exciting discussion because everybody wants to go fast. And so we need to make sure that we're very clear on what the expectations are regarding all the contracts that need to be in place, the timing and the move of materials, the release process of the materials, and then actually getting it to the clinical site for patient administering to the patient. The other thing that we really need to keep in mind is that the collaborator is not a contract manufacturing organization for Roche or Genentech. So again, like I mentioned earlier, they are not making their product for us. They give us their product and we use it in combination in the study. So that's really important from an internal stakeholder perspective, because oftentimes we do get questions that, why can't maybe this go faster? Or maybe the collaborator does something a little bit different than we do. Why can't it be the same? And so we do have to ensure that people continually have awareness that this is a combination study and not a contract manufacturer making a product for us that we've designed. The note I have up here, the last note, is we have no input on how the collaborator manufactures their molecule, right? So again, not co-developing. So we do not provide input on how we think maybe the monoclonal antibody they make for the study is to be made. I think that can be challenging at times because, again, people think about the partner as maybe a contract manufacturer instead of a true partner. So what are the key factors in success in the collaborator work? So there is a consistent interaction with the collaborator from when we first start working with them to discuss the idea or the opportunity of doing a combination study, through contract implementation, through study management and study closure. So there's routine meetings, standardized agendas, and a dedicated team member that facilitates all discussions with internal stakeholders as required. So per collaborator, there is one person within the team that facilitates these discussions with the collaborator and any internal stakeholder that may be required. So that could be a supply chain, quality, regulatory, safety. My team will pull that group together and facilitate that discussion. We have a clear escalation process when events occur that cannot be resolved at what we would consider the local level. And so you can think about escalation processes coming into play when you have supply concerns or product changes, or as I put /challenges. What I mean by that is if, let's say, the collaborator changed a manufacturing site, that would be really important to understand, because that will impact the supply chain for us, because we are cross-referencing the collaborator's filing for our studies. Because again, there's proprietary information that the collaborator has about their product. And so for us to be able to file in different countries, we are cross-referencing their filing. So if there are significant changes in their process, which is a regulatory change, then we need to understand that. So this clear escalation path is very important. And it's important that both organizations know, the Genentech Roche organization and the collaborator. In this key factors for success, we review critical topics on a consistent basis. So once we are in normal operations mode with a collaborator, there is a meeting on a monthly basis. That can change. It can be more frequently if needed, if there's supplies coming through a little bit more regularly. But those critical topics that are reviewed consistently are supply plan, because there is a supply plan that is available and reviewed routinely for the entire study. Resupply activities and timing. So think about this, these products are coming from all over the world to a facility of our selection for labeling and packaging activities. Material transfer activities, this really has to do when we're dealing with contract manufacturers where we potentially could have the product being labeled and packaged. We do routinely ask that, if there's any manufacturing changes in the process or other regulatory impacting changes. Again, the regulatory impacting changes are very important since we're cross-referencing their studies. So if they make a change and they're changing their regulatory filing, we need to understand that. and understand it in plenty of time to be able to work through our regulatory filings following on theirs. So let's just talk about some advantages that we've learned on this journey to date. So the dedicated work group to support all collaboration work is key. And the reason that is oftentimes the companies we work with are of varying sizes. And we want to make sure that we are routinely interfacing with the collaborator with one voice from Roche and not coming into a discussion with varied amounts of people and asking different questions and really maybe expanding the conversation. We really want to make sure that we're managing with the collaborator in the most aligned, succinct fashion. It really avoids communication challenges. It really allows for a very streamlined and strategic approach to getting and sharing all the required information and allowing the work to really progress in the most streamlined fashion as possible. We do have a huge amount of standardized processes that we work with consistently. So for every collaborator, we ask for the same information. And so we have that approach where we're using the same manner in asking for that information. Now, whether or not the collaborator leverages the documents we're providing, they may not, and they may not because they have a different document that meets all the expectations for information sharing, but comes in a different format. And that is perfectly acceptable, but we do have internally a standard process to support the collaboration work. It just really brings a great amount of efficiency to interfacing with the collaborator and sharing expectations. And then the other thing from an advantage point is we have dedicated subject matter experts internally. So from a quality, regulatory, supply chain perspective, planning perspective, we have dedicated subject matter experts internally that we work with. And those experts were also integral into creating the standard processes to support the collaborator work. So we really just refined how this process happens with our internal experts as well, so that we weren't getting different opinions or thoughts or ideas on how to manage this internally, that we really have one process to bring to the collaborator. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we've experienced on this journey, because I think anytime you're working with outside companies, there's learnings to be had. So one of the challenges we found is that many internal stakeholders, they have different expectations. So they may want information in a particular fashion. We may not be able to meet that with the collaborator. Again, it goes back to having those standardized documents. We routinely clarify what's different about the work this group is doing with collaborators versus other partner or contract manufacturing work. There are many external stakeholders to support with different approaches and systems. So every collaborator we work with has a slightly different process on how they manage their supply, how they manage their quality, how they manage their regulatory. So we need to just be open to that. Is going to always be, it's always going to make this journey a little exciting. The regulatory impacting changes, as I had talked about earlier, those are really, they can certainly have an impact on the collaboration. So you want to make sure that we're always talking about that and getting in front of it as best we can. And then supply issues. So we could find ourselves in a situation where maybe we've gotten a supply of material and maybe that collaborator calls and says, you know what, we need some of that back for whatever reason. So how do we balance providing the collaborator with the material maybe that they're requesting back while managing our study requirements as well? Because in that situation, we do always want to be a good partner with the collaborator. So the lessons learned, and these lessons learned happen daily. So one of the things we've learned very quickly and continue to be reminded of is that internal stakeholders think of partners in many different ways. So we always have to be clear on what the function of the group is. We have also learned that clear and open communication is critical from the start of the collaboration and with all stakeholders. So being very open and transparent about what is going to be coming in this journey for contract negotiations, contract implementation, moving of materials, study startup, study closure, rollover studies, being very transparent about that. Every collaborator is different. I mentioned that in the last slide. I can't mention it enough. We may be doing the same thing, working with a collaborator, bringing in a product, running a combination study, but every collaborator is different, and it's really important to just understand that and be open to it. It's critical to understand criteria for materials going to the EU and the Brexit impact to new and ongoing studies. So as the Brexit gets sorted out and the timing of it, that is really critical to understand that process and understand where the materials are coming and flowing to and from, so that you can make sure that when your product is going into the EU, that it's being properly routed and released. The last thing is really the dedicated group will be engaged in many different topics. So I think when I first started in this organization and first started the group, I didn't have a really realistic understanding of all the new things that we were going to get exposed to. So tax codes, because again, product is moving around the globe. And so we need to make sure that we understand the tax expectations and requirements, regulatory filing requirements, operations, both internally to get the product label and packaged properly, and then at the clinical site as well. Qualified person requirements versus responsible person requirements. So our QPs in Europe and our RPs in Switzerland, we need to make sure when we're interfacing with them that we really have a clear understanding of what their requirements are legally and their expectations are. And quality assurance requirements as well, both internal and external. So for the non-EU or Swiss countries we're working with. Alliance management expectations and clinical operations. So those were just some of the things that I think as we've been on this journey with the combination work, is that those are areas that had, I initially probably didn't think, for tax codes and Incoterms that we would be really that engaged in it, but we absolutely are. And it's critical to be open to all these new elements that are part of the combination study. So with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Denise, for this presentation. Now I'd like to open the floor for discussion. Remember, you can ask questions using the chat feature of the platform. So first question, who is the group who worked on or in combination studies?
Great question. So the group is named the Industry Clinical Collaborations Group, and it is a global team. And that is their sole focus, is industry clinical collaboration, so the collaborator work.
Secondly, how many of them are external partners?
So this team only manages external partners. If the combination study is done with 2 internal Roche Genentech molecules, that is managed internally, and we are not a part of that because we wouldn't be working with an outside organization. So this team manages all of the internal clinical collaborations.
What is your biggest concern or challenge within working in combination studies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think what I find is making sure that when we start a new collaboration in early discussions, that we're really transparent about the expectations and the needs, and making sure that we continue to discuss and share the why when we're asking for specific information very early on, maybe in discussions, like if I pick on supply chain. If I just talk to a new collaborator and I say, I need to understand your supply chain, and I leave it at that. I really don't help them understand what's critical about understanding the supply chain and why, because without understanding the supply chain, we can't develop a quality release approach. So to me, that constant vigilance and being very open in your communication is critical, because the more open you are at the beginning, the smoother that relationship is going to evolve and progress.
As we have no further questions, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you once again to Denise for this excellent presentation. Our 13th Annual Proteins and Antibodies Congress will be taking place on the 27th to 29th of April 2020 in London, UK. If you'd like any further information on the Congress or would like a copy of the conference programme, please contact the marketing department or visit the conference website. On behalf of Oxford Global, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today.